Our next candidate for district attorney is Maggie Krell. She has spent her legal career focused on making her community a better place. She is a staunch advocate for victims' rights and is a proven leader with the broad experience Sacramento needs at the DA's office as the DA office undertakes new challenges.
Alice, Maggie Crowell was here but had to leave. We're running a little bit late.
Okay.
She had to go.
Okay. So,
Help our timing.
Is there a third candidate?
Yes, there is.
okay, Todd Leras is a former prosecutor of the year in the Sacramento DA's office and has logged more than 22 years working in the criminal justice system. He is a Sacramento County Deputy and Supervising Deputy District Attorney, and most recently a federal prosecutor as an Assistant U.S. Attorney. Before that, he was an Assistant Public Defender. Todd is endorsed by more Democratic Party attorneys. Todd is endorsed by more Democratic Party political clubs, including the Latino Democrats of Sacramento County, Veterans Democrat Club of Sacramento County, and many others. Did I say that right? Okay. Than any other candidate in the DA race. His very first personal endorsement came from former California Supreme Court Justice Cruz Reynoso. Todd has successfully prosecuted thousands of cases, personally putting bad characters not only in county jail, but state and federal prison. He has jailed child pornographers, murderers, sex and human traffickers, rapists, child molesters, spousal abusers, and white-collar criminals. He is a former prosecutor of the year in that office and has logged more than 22 years working in the system. Please welcome Todd.
Spot here right before lunch, and we're running a little bit behind, so I'll try to be brief but also be comprehensive. What I wanted to talk about today was something that occurs to me when the introduction just mentioned that the first endorsement I received was from a personal hero of mine, Justice Reynoso, who I see sitting there getting ready to speak on a topic that's not going to take a lot of time because it's ethics in politics. And so that should be a short topic, at least in my experience. But I wanted to talk briefly about two important issues that I think differentiate me from the other two candidates running for district attorney, and they're things that Justice Reynoso has exemplified throughout his career. The first is the issue of integrity in terms of making sure that you do the right thing regardless of who you may owe or what you may owe them. And the second thing is justice, particularly in the area, and I just heard Miguel ask Ms. Schubert, who is a friend of mine and a former teammate of mine in homicides and in child abuse, somebody who I differ on policy only. There are no personal differences between us. I consider her a friend. But we have a very different view about officer-involved shootings and what should be done with officer-involved shootings. So let me move to those because I've talked extensively, I talked about this the other night at the DA forum, about my views about realignment, about justice, about fair sentences, and they're quite a bit different from the incumbent district attorney. I essentially have had the experience of serving on both sides in terms of being a defense attorney early in my career as a public defender and then being a prosecutor for 20 years, giving up my job as a federal prosecutor to seek this position. It's important enough. I made that sacrifice. But I found during the course of this that one of the things that you have to do is you have to be prepared to prosecute people who may have given you something along the way to get you to where you are. And that affects the integrity of the system. And let me give you a really classic example of that, and that is you get endorsements from political figures, and one of the reasons why I had to leave the federal government as a federal prosecutor was because of the thing called the Hatch Act. It says, look, you are not going to be a particularly good federal prosecutor investigating political corruption if you are investigating people who either gave you money or endorsed your candidacy. And I agree with that. But I am the only candidate who faced that prohibition. I'm getting the 3-minute mark now, so I'll move on. But I just want to say that this process itself is something that even though most of the endorsements that occurred when I got into this race late, and I got in late because I had to leave my job, and my mother was terminally ill at the time, so I had some important decisions to make, and once she passed in late July, I decided that it was very important, and that because of justice and my commitment to this community, I was going to go ahead and leave my job, and I was going to seek this position. But I've found that it requires you to do some things in seeking endorsements and money that are not particularly savory and I think have a negative impact upon political corruption investigations. As DA, if I'm lucky enough to be elected, I can tell you I am not bound by those political figures as a consequence of that, and I would fully investigate political corruption regardless of whether it was people who committed it in my own party or in the opposite party. It doesn't make a difference. I don't owe anybody anything, and I would fully prosecute political corruption. The other day at the B endorsement interview, they said, well, what about our feature that we had about Richard Pan the other day that we've mentioned a couple of times where we showed that he wasn't living in his district and it was the same thing that Rod White had done. I don't owe anybody anything. Of course I would investigate that, and if there was something there, of course I would go forward with it. It doesn't matter whether you belong to my party or the opposite party. And I think that every DA should be able to say that. The second issue is the one of officer-involved shootings. And quite frankly, that's the topic I hear the most when I go out into communities, particularly people from the African American and Latino communities. They are really always bringing that topic up because it impacts them the most. And one of the reasons why it meant so much for me to have Justice Reynoso's endorsement was because of his work in the Reynoso Commission on the Luis Gutierrez shooting in Yolo County. And I anticipate there may be some questions about that, so I'll reserve, or at least one question about that, so I'll reserve time in case it is. But let me tell you that I do not come with an agenda on officer-involved shootings, and that's the thing that people have criticized the most, that they view the DA as looking at them and saying, as they start out, how can I justify this shooting? How can I say that was a good shooting by the officers? And my view of that is the DA is essentially a quasi-judicial position, should be evaluating them, considering all relevant evidence and making a decision only after all relevant evidence is in. I'm from Sonoma County. I know they're dealing with Andy Lopez, the 12-year-old boy being shot by a deputy now. And if that process isn't fair, then it doesn't have any integrity. And I can promise you, if I were the DA, I would always look at these things fairly and only make decisions after all evidence has been considered. So that's my position on officer-involved shooting. And at this point, I'd be prepared to take questions if someone has them.
Thanks, Todd. Thank you for coming. In regards to the Latino community and community at large, in regards to the justice system, the last candidate mentioned the question that was asked earlier, that it was about education. And to me, that was as satisfying as a bologna sandwich. Okay. And so I don't think the Latino community needs to be educated on what it is to be racially profiled and how we deal with the justice system. I think it's a matter of trust. And I think the trust has been broken. How would you reestablish that trust with the district attorney's office to the Latino community and the other communities at large?
There are two things that need to be done. First of all, the district attorney has to be accessible to the Latino community. I mean, I'm quite surprised that one of the candidates didn't come here and speak today. I was here in part to hear that candidate speak because that candidate was the Attorney General responsible for reviewing the Luis Gutierrez shooting in Yolo County. So I wanted to hear what that candidate had to say. That's Ms. Krell. So from the very top, there has to be the accessibility. And I promise that I will continue to be accessible. If lucky enough to be elected, I plan to continue to be engaged with the community, for my door to be open, and for me to listen to the concerns of the community. The second thing is the education that starts in the DA's office at the very top. Anyone who thinks that racism doesn't exist is deluding themselves. It's there. I am now in private practice. Two of my first clients were Latino, and I noticed a significant disparity in the sentences that they were offered in terms of early resolution than Caucasians. I don't think that was intentional. However, the DAs assigned were not mindful of that. It's ridiculous that a 19-year-old woman with no record who is accused of embezzling $3,000 from Macy's is looking at a 180-day felony sentence, and a Caucasian male who is a registered sex offender gets the same offer. Can I say that again? The same offer. People need to be mindful. I'm mindful. That's important. Is there another question? Yes.
What are your thoughts I've sat on the multicultural council for about 6 years at Canada, and I quit it because it was just about during that time, never found anything bad about any law enforcement. During that time, there was a gentleman who was killed in Sacramento who was tased 17 times. Let me repeat that. 17 times he was tased. The DA could not find nothing wrong against those officers. What are we going to do about tasing? One thing is shooting. But they are tasing our people to death. What can we do to prevent that?
It's the same thing, quite frankly, which is, right now, there's this public perception, and it has some validity. But the DA enters these things thinking, let's justify what the officers did. And I bring Justice Reynosa's commission to mind when I talk about that. The same would be true with tasing, that there's this effort. If you read the Yolo County report on the Gutierrez shooting, they bent every single fact they could to justify what the officers did. And when I saw that Ms. Krell had reviewed that shooting, I went back, I read the report, and immediately I looked at it and I said, you know, they rely on a confidential jailhouse informant primarily to justify what the officers did. And they say, he said, the informant, that Gutierrez was known by the nickname of Indio and was good with a knife, and he was surprised that the officers survived. Okay? This was what they used to justify and say this was a lawful killer. Now, as an experienced prosecutor who's prosecuted murderers, rapists, child molesters for over 20 years, and then a federal prosecutor conducting investigations, I looked and I said, wait a minute. If I were cross-examining that person as a witness, I want to know some things that are significant. Who was this person? What were they charged with? What did they get for what they said? And ultimately, did you corroborate? Did you go out and find anyone else who said he was known by Indio? Anyone else who said the things that this confidential informant said that can back it up? That was never done. Never. It wasn't done by Yolo, and then when Ms. Crow reviewed it, she didn't do it. So I'm, quite frankly, when you said you were upset, I'm upset. I'm upset that she didn't come here today and speak, and that she didn't ask or answer those same questions. Whether it's tasing or shooting, I'm going to take the same approach, which is the approach of fairness. I certainly have many friends who are officers. I know how dangerous their job is. I'll be fair to them, but I'm going to also be fair to the community. And that means I'm going to meet with members of the community, I'm going to hear what they have to say, and I'm going to consider the relevant evidence when I look at tasings and shootings. Thank you.